Welcome to the Grow and Go podcast, where we discuss feeding under fives in the early education setting. Your hosts today are Claire and myself, Stella. We're accredited practicing dietitians with a special interest in feeding kids under 5. This podcast is being recorded on the lands of the Yagara and Turrbal peoples. We pay our respects to traditional custodians and their elders past and present. So today we'll be talking about introducing solids, when to start, what to provide, and strategies to ensure a healthy start. So to begin, when should we introduce solids, Claire?
So the current advice is to start solids when infants reach 6 months old, and there is some variability in this. So an infant might be ready a little earlier. Usually we would recommend not giving solids before about 4.5 months. There are some signs that you should look out for when a child is ready to have their first solids. They need to be able to hold their head unsupported and with good control. And they need to show some signs that they're interested in food. So reaching for food, excitement when they see it, watching other people eat. They also need to show less of a reflex called tongue thrusting, which is where they will reflexively push things out of their mouth by pushing their tongue forward. As an infant has less of this reaction, they'll be able to accept things like a spoon and certain foods into their mouth. So these kind of signs suggest that an infant is ready to try some solids. In some long daycare centres, they accept babies from 6 weeks old. So you are possibly going to see babies in your care that have not started their introduction to solids. So being aware of some of these signs can be helpful so you can support the family knowing when their baby is ready to start.
Now, it's important to note here that bubs that are born prematurely may need to start solids at different ages. So this is going to be based on their developmental stage and their nutritional status, particularly their iron levels, rather than their actual age. A discussion with the family around their child's needs is important to ensure this process begins at the right time, and they may require some help from a health professional to determine when that is.
Okay, excellent. And what's the process of how we should be introducing solids to babies?
The general rule is to start quite small and go slowly. You can begin with smooth and runny purees of one type of food at a time, and starting with maybe only 1 or 2 teaspoons per day. And you can really just let the child lead the way with how much and how often you give solids to a child. Best to introduce solids when the child is most alert. So this is different for each child, but usually after they've had a sleep is a good idea. And over time, you can gradually increase the frequency and amount of solids as the baby is getting used to them. You've got to remember Bub's stomach is still very small, so you don't want to force them to eat more than they actually want. And really, it's about following baby's cues and just exposing them to food slowly and letting them decide how much they want to eat at this very early stage.
In addition to the texture of the foods we should be offering and I guess the when we should be offering foods, we know, of course, that iron is one of the most important nutrients for babies as it supports their brain development and prevents anemia. So would you be able to give a few examples of some iron-rich foods that are suitable for babies?
Yeah, of course. So the one that everyone's probably really familiar with at this early point is iron-fortified baby cereals, which are usually made up with either a mixture of breast milk or formula. You can also puree down a few different foods, so things like any meats, chicken, fish, eggs, tofu, for example. You could use beans or lentils or even green vegetables that are all likely to have little traces of iron in them. And depending on baby's age and ability, you can offer these foods in different textures. So you might initially start off with puree, but you could also use mashed or minced forms. One thing to be wary of is that plant-based diets may not give a bub enough iron, zinc, and B12. And so using those iron-fortified cereals and foods on that plant-based diet is really essential for babies. And we would recommend that some advice was gathered from a health professional just to ensure that the child is getting the types of foods in that are going to be helpful.
So we talk a lot about introducing a big variety of foods for babies. Would you be able to talk a little bit about why it's so important to introduce a variety of foods to babies?
There's 2 main reasons to introduce a wide range of foods early on. One of them is to do with preventing fussy or picky eating, and the other one is around food allergies. So to prevent fussy or picky eating, it's important to introduce savoury vegetables before sweet foods like fruits, sweet potato or pumpkin. This will help Bub be less picky with vegetables later on. Giving those savoury vegetables on their own as well without the sweeter fruit or potato or pumpkin can help them get used to those slightly more bitter flavours and not develop a preference for sweeter foods. In terms of the allergy side of things, there's emerging evidence that delaying introduction of solids beyond 7 months can increase the risk of allergy development, particularly for some common allergen foods. So babies should be exposed to the 9 common allergen foods before their first birthday to prevent food allergies or help prevent food allergies. These foods are peanuts, tree nuts, eggs, cow's milk, soy, wheat, fish, shellfish, and sesame. Conversations with parents about family histories of allergies and which ones have already been introduced at home will be vital for the early childhood education setting. A great place to go for more information around this topic is the Nip Allergies in the Bub website. There's also excellent resources for parents on that one, and we really recommend you share that with your families. There is also a really good Askia anaphylaxis e-training course that's worth looking into, and the Allergy Aware website, which has resources specifically for the education sector around food allergies.
Bringing this back to the early childhood education centre setting, how can centres adapt their menus to make sure that the food that they're providing to babies gives them the best possible start?
It should be relatively easy for centres to adapt existing menus to suit the bubs and meet their nutritional and texture requirements. There are a few key things that you can consider. So first of all, making sure you have those iron-rich foods on your menu each day. Then in terms of textures, making sure that you don't stick to purees for too long. That should only be quite a short period of time when a bub's starting this first lot of solids. Should be able to move on to mashed foods quite quickly. It's also great to encourage finger foods and self-feeding from about 8 months. So that helps again with that menu modification. And just making sure that you're providing quite a broad range of fruits and vegetables within your menu to get that variety in. There's some great resources out there that you can go to for some support around this. There's the Food Checker website to help with your menu planning and adequacy. And there's also the Healthy Eating Advisory Service, have a plethora of resources around this kind of topic.
Excellent. And we will link those resources in the show notes so you can go and check them out. Sometimes parents might come in with a few safety concerns about introducing solids. Are there any safety concerns that we need to be aware of when we are starting solids with babies?
One thing you might come across with the bubs is gagging. So gagging is where a baby makes a cough or a choking sound and pushes food out of their mouth with their tongue. Now, this is a pretty normal and not a dangerous situation. This is baby's way of learning how to handle different textures and sizes of food. It also protects them from choking because it's moving the food forward in their mouth. So gagging is a bit different from choking, and sometimes the two are confused. So choking is when baby can't breathe because something's actually blocking their airway. And of course, this is very serious and immediate action should be taken to get rid of that blocking. So it's key that educators are always supervising babies when they're eating and they don't leave them alone with food, and that you avoid giving them foods that could potentially be choked on. So hard, round or sticky foods that could be choked on, things like whole grapes, cherry tomatoes, nuts, popcorn, marshmallows, for example, those kind of textures that could potentially get stuck.
Something that gets a lot of questions lately is using baby-led weaning. So would you be able to give us a bit of a rundown about what baby-led weaning is and I guess how it compares to how we've done things previously?
Baby-led weaning is where babies are allowed to feed themselves with finger foods instead of being spoon-fed by an adult. This method allows bubs to explore different foods at their own pace. It can be a bit more responsive to appetite and helps develop independence and motor skills. There's no right or wrong way to feed a child, and most children end up being fed through a bit of a combination of that more traditional spoon-feeding approach and baby-led weaning. There's also no evidence that baby-led weaning will lead to nutrient deficiencies or is more of a choke risk. The best way to prevent choking is for children to be seated properly while eating appropriate foods for their developmental stage, and be supervised by an adult.
Okay, and would you be able to provide some tips on the best ways to introduce new foods to babies so that early childhood educators can help parents through this exciting time?
So when we're introducing new foods, one of the key safety things is to ensure that the child is alert and not too tired. So as I mentioned before, one of the best times to introduce a food is after they've had a sleep. You may like to pick one sort of goal to focus on for each meal. So maybe introducing one new texture or one new type of food at a time, just to make sure that you're not overwhelming the child. If you try to introduce too many textures or foods all at once, it might be a bit too much. You might put the child off completely. You may need to offer a new texture or food multiple times before a child will eat it as well. So don't take their refusal to eat something as they're never going to touch this. Making sure that you bring it back to share with them again and again is important. The other thing to consider is the types of drinks that babies are having. So really their main drink should be breast milk or formula, infant formula and water. You should continue offering these drinks as the main drink up until 12 months. And you could use a sippy cup, a straw cup, or an open cup throughout the day to provide this, depending on how the child is developing and what stage they're at.
So when we think about how early childhood educators can help parents through the introduction to solid phase, what are some key things that educators can do to support parents?
Early childhood educators are a really important source of support for parents through lots of different stages of development in those early years, and definitely for the introduction to solids phase. One of the things that educators can do to help is obviously just in sharing evidence-based information on this process. So what they're going to include, what the signs of readiness are, what timings they should consider, what the sort of key points around types of foods and textures are that they might want to include at certain points. Now, the Grow and Go Toolbox is a really easy and convenient way for you to do that. We have collated a lot of evidence-based information on this topic, and it could be a really simple thing that your centre could do to just direct parents of kiddies of the right kind of age to the toolbox and help them navigate and find the kind of resources that can help educate them on these topics. The other thing that educators can do to help support families is addressing their concerns. So it's quite likely that parents will come to you with questions or queries about their child's eating habits, and some of those questions you'll be able to address and support them with. If they're coming up to you with questions that you don't have answers to, that are beyond your knowledge, it's then important that you can guide them to the right person to answer those questions. One of the ways that you can do that is using our Find a Health Professional tool on the Grow and Go website. Now, this tool is designed to help parents find a health professional local to them that can support them with their child's eating concerns. And you can access that by going to the website, and you could work through that tool with them to help them find someone that might be able to support them.
Okay, so that was a really thorough look at the introduction to solids, and it was a lot of information to take in. So we have created a resource to support this, and that is called the Lumpy Roads to Solids, and that goes through all of the milestones that we discussed today, and I guess the key messages that we need to think about in those stages of development.
That's right, Stella. And the other really useful resource on this topic is our 2 podcast episodes on food allergies with Dr. Merin Netting. These provide some background information for educators on food allergy prevention and also management strategies for at the centre. Also check out our show notes for a link to the NIP Allergies in the Bub website. This is a great website to share with your families on allergy prevention in children under 12 months.
That brings us to the end of this episode. We hope that you found this discussion useful, and we really encourage you to check out our other episodes on topics like fussy eating or allergies and intolerances. Visit the Grow and Go Toolbox to find the resources discussed today, as well as many other resources on feeding under 5s. As usual, all resources will be linked in the show notes. Thanks!